We have our speakers here. So once again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Naja Hashimi. I'm an advisor for UNDP's Democratic Institutions in the Digital Era team, and I'm your moderator for this session. A warm welcome to all of you. This is the second session of our webinar series on AI and elections. It's wonderful to see familiar faces, more names than faces. Feel free to turn on your videos. Colleagues and partners joining from around the world, please tell us in the chat who you are. It's really beautiful to see the diversity of our community here. We launched this webinar series earlier this year because of the urgent demand coming from all of you, from the field, from our national counterparts, our electoral colleagues, and from the broader democratic community, from many of you here today. Everywhere we go, the questions are the same. What does AI mean for the future of elections? How is it already shaping participation, trust, information? And how do we keep pace when things are changing so rapidly? The truth is, no one can keep up alone. AI is advancing at an exponential rate. New tools, new risks, new opportunities. Every single day we hear of these. Electoral institutions, governments, civic actors simply cannot address these challenges in isolation. That is why UNDP created this series, so we can connect across countries, share lessons, and learn together as a global community of electoral practitioners and those who are working in the ecospace of elections. We jointly have responsibility to help safeguard democratic resilience in this digital era. And we're doing this by bringing all of you together and experts like our panelists today, as we see access to knowledge and to information as a public good, not something accessible only to a few experts or tech companies. In our first webinar in June, we laid out the foundations. That discussion focused on the structural risks of AI, deepfakes, disinformation, global regulatory frameworks, and institutional readiness. It was about mapping the problem and beginning to think about responses. Today, in our second session, we turn the lens to something even more human and immediate: participation, power, and public trust. This session asks, how is AI shaping voter behavior and political discourse? How can institutions safeguard trust when information is increasingly AI generated? And how are citizens, especially women and youth, exercising civic power in this digital age? These are the questions, and we have a fantastic panel of experts in this conversation. I will introduce our first speaker, Dr. David Evan Harris. He's a leading global voice on AI and democracy. He teaches at UC Berkeley. He covers courses from everything AI ethics to law to civic technology and social movements. Beyond academia, he has advised institutions, including the Brennan Center for Justice, the California Initiative for Technology and Democracy, and the Center for International Governance Innovation. Previously at Meta, he led teams working on responsible AI and civic integrity. With the breadth of experience across academia, policy, and the tech industry, David will help us understand how AI is invisibly shaping participation and public trust. We're very happy to have you here, David. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. Let me see if I can share my screen with you and get started. Hopefully this works. All right, can you see my presentation here? All right, great. So my story actually starts here. So this is a room at Facebook headquarters in Menlo Park, California, that was called the War Room. And this wasn't the first time the company set up a war room. This was the first elections-focused war room. So I worked at Facebook, which became Meta, from 2018 to 2023. And part of my job for a couple of years was working on election integrity all over the world. And when I joined in 2018, Actually, I signed my offer letter in February of 2018, and March was the biggest scandal in the company's history. It was the drop of the Cambridge Analytica news, and this was a pretty big deal for the company, and that set off. The Cambridge Analytica scandal set off a lot of work in the company to make sure that things like that never happen again. And so this war room effort, there was a lot that we did there. Eventually it became hundreds of these takedowns, and the war room ran 24 hours a day. There was one of these in Menlo Park, one of these in Dublin, Ireland, and one in Singapore. And it was a big effort, cross-disciplinary. There were, I'm trained in sociology. There were researchers like me, engineers, designers, ready to respond really quickly to threats to elections anywhere. And you can see there's a Brazilian flag and an American flag on the wall of this room. That's because in 2018, we were working on the US midterm elections at the same time as the Brazilian presidential election. So one of the things I'm most proud of in my time there was this takedown in Honduras. And this is all public information. But I think that this Honduras example is really instructive because of the brazenness of what took place there. Literally, the person administering the president of Honduras's Facebook account was also administering somewhere around 1,000 fake pages. And the only thing those fake pages did was like and promote the posts of the president of Honduras. And it's that kind of brazenness, not even going to any lengths to hide this kind of election interference from the platforms that are monitoring it, that is particularly shocking. So it wasn't just Cambridge Analytica, though. It was also this guy, the guy behind Vladimir Putin, you might have heard of before. He's Yevgeny Prigozhin, Putin's chef. He's now most famous for his, he's a serial entrepreneur, but his work with the Wagner Group, you might have heard of. He went to Russian prisons, recruited prisoners to fight on the front lines of the Ukraine war. Absolutely tragic, cannon fodder. So many got killed. But the exchange is maybe they get out of prison if they make it out of the war alive. And then Prigozhin got famous also for staging this very brief mutiny against Putin. And then his plane mysteriously crashed on August 23rd, 2023, which is what happens to Putin's opponents somehow. But the thing that people don't know about Prigozhin, which I think is just as important and really interesting, is this previous chapter from his history where he operated this place that, it really sounds like a place I would like to work, the Internet Research Agency in St. Petersburg, in a beautiful city, nice place to live. But this place was a building that reportedly had 1,000 people approximately going to work every day, and their full-time job is to interfere in elections around the world. The US presidential election of 2016 was an early focus, but they were not constrained, according to reports, to where they would work. And this is really important because, again, it shows us that these kinds of election interference campaigns are not isolated efforts by a handful of people, but these are extremely well-resourced campaigns that have a lot of money and organization behind them. And Prigozhin's gone now, but I really do miss him a bit because of his honesty and brazenness. This is a quote that from CNN quoted him on Telegram saying, "I'll answer you very subtly and delicately. I apologize. I'll allow a certain ambiguity. Gentlemen, we interfered, we interfere, and we will interfere," Prigozhin said. Carefully, precisely, surgically, in our own way, as we know how. During our pinpoint operations, we'll remove both kidneys and the liver at once. And so this is Prigozhin saying, not only did I interfere in all these elections, I continue to do it and I will keep doing it. And there you go. And I think we should take him at his word there. And it's obviously not just Russia here. This is some language from a New York Times article that I really like. Meta's biggest single takedown, and this is after I was no longer working at the company. But this is a guy who's now actually working at OpenAI, interestingly. But Ben Nimmo says this is the biggest single takedown of a single network we've ever conducted. Said Ben Nimmo, who heads Meta's security team, looks at global threats. When you put it together with all the activity we took down across the internet, we concluded it's the largest covert campaign that we know of today. Now, I want to call attention to that language language that we know of today. That reminds me of the kind of language you'd expect to hear from an astronomer using a brand new space telescope that can see further out into the universe than any previous telescope to find an undiscovered galaxy full of mystery and intrigue. But this is a platform. This is one of the wealthiest companies in the history of the world. They can know what is going on in their platform. It does not have to be a mystery to them. This is a result of a specific choice to not spend enough money to take down these operations. And that's what's happening in a really systematic way. Right now, these operations are happening all over the internet, Reddit, TikTok also, and they're not disappearing. And sometimes these campaigns are not just about elections, but in this case, this is a Chinese campaign trying to just make Americans more racist. And if any of you have spent any time in the United States, you know that's not something we need help with here. So this is part of a broader movement that we're seeing. And Naja, please give me a warning when I've got like 2 minutes left and I'll wrap it up quickly. But this is a broader movement of the big tech backslide. This is a report from 2023 that documents really well how following Elon Musk's lead, big tech is really surrendering to disinformation right now. And this is very different from the situation we were in and that I was in 2018, where companies like Facebook were dropping tons of cash on trying to stop this stuff. Now we saw in 2023, YouTube stops removing videos pushing lies about the 2020 US presidential election. We see now in 2025 from Google, they are deciding they're not going to fulfill their commitments to the code of practice on disinformation. And then Facebook and Instagram get rid of fact checkers altogether in 2025 following Trump's reelection. This is the global fact-checking community in 2019. I think fact-checking is incredibly important to have actual trained professional journalists doing this work. Meta's pulling out of this in the US. Maybe they'll pull out in other parts of the world. This chart from the State of the Fact Checkers report shows that around 3/4 of fact checkers around the world are taking money from Meta, and around 8% of them get 95% or more of their money from Meta. So when these companies pull out of fact checking, it has huge cascading impacts on this fragile but critical industry. Now, if we weren't sure if AI is already having an impact on democracy, just look to this recent New York Times article. This is from June of this year. AI is starting to wear down democracy. Content generated by AI has become a factor in elections around the world. Most of it's bad, misleading voters, discrediting the democratic practice. This has great quotes in this article from the International Panel on the Information Environment Survey. And also, I think it's really important to call attention to this other article I'm one of the co-authors on with the Brennan Center for Justice at New York University Law School. At the Munich Security Conference now about a year and a half ago, a group of a couple dozen tech companies got together and said, we are going to sign this AI elections accord and stop AI interference. We looked specifically point by point at all the commitments they made in this agreement a year and a half ago. There's systematic failure to live up to these commitments. Some of the companies here and there did a good job. They failed to do what they promised, to give transparency to academics, researchers, civil society, and they just had no meaningful way for us to get a window into this work. So this is all feeds into something that I'll close on, which is called the metaphor of the bear. And this is something I heard a number of different times when I worked in Silicon Valley from different companies. At least 2 of the companies whose logos are on this slide are using this metaphor. And the idea here is that the bear represents a regulator chasing after these companies. And the metaphor of the bear is a management strategy metaphor. And it says, if you're a tech company and you're in the forest and you're running away from the regulator who is a bear, that the best thing to do is not to run as fast as you can away from this bear, to be extra responsible, to be extra compliant, but actually the best thing you can do is run the second slowest, be the second worst of these companies, because that's where you optimize profit and you do the absolute bare minimum that you can without getting caught and eaten by this bear, because the bear is only hungry enough to chow down on the worst and the slowest of these tech companies. So literally we have these companies and the wealthiest institutions in the world saying internally to their teams, saying, let's just be the second worst on things like responsible AI. Let's just be the second worst on stopping election interference. As long as we're not the worst, we're fine. And this is the kind of attitude that begs regulation from more countries around the world. And I think there's a fine line in figuring out the role of governments in elections and in speech. But I think that examples like the EU and the work they've done on the Digital Services Act, that kind of work requiring companies to, at a bare minimum, show that they are working on these issues is absolutely critical. And I hope that as many of you as possible can work to pressure these companies to do more. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, David. I think there's a lot there to flesh out in the conversations, and also some ideas of how we do what you just asked us to do, which is to push for this regulation as an election community. But first, before we get into that conversation, I want to introduce our second speaker, Ms. Olga Gonzalez Martinez. She is the Deputy Director at Mexico's National Electoral Institute. She works on information and knowledge management. Olga has been part of the electoral professional service for over 20 years with extensive leadership in electoral law, governance, and transparency. She's written numerous articles on elections, quality of participation, and advises on electoral voting to quick counts. She knows elections inside and out. And she's here to give us insight of how an electoral EMB is tackling these challenges that David mentioned in the broader scale. So Olga, over to you. Colleagues, we have interpretation for French, Spanish, Arabic. You know where the little dot is. So please, Olga will speak in Spanish.
Thank you, Naja. Good morning, everyone. Saludo a mis compañeros de panel y a quienes nos escuchan desde México y desde el resto del mundo. En un mundo globalizado, hiperconectado, donde la información fluye a la velocidad de la luz, en las primeras décadas del siglo XXI, estamos viviendo una crisis política, social y económica, con guerras en distintas regiones, pobreza extrema en otras, fenómenos como los que ocurrieron a inicios del siglo, como el Brexit, el no a la paz en Colombia, el arribo de populismos de izquierda y de derecha en varias latitudes, dan cuenta de una ciudadanía cada vez más alejada de los valores democráticos. La desconfianza en las instituciones públicas y entre las personas y el consecuente debilitamiento del tejido social son fenómenos que reflejan el desencanto con la democracia y subrayan la necesidad de impulsar un cambio cultural. En este contexto de crisis de la democracia, es necesario construir espacios de deliberación y participación política, y para ello las tecnologías de la información y las comunicaciones juegan un papel relevante. La red es hoy, sin duda, el ágora donde la sociedad puede expresar sus preocupaciones y organizarse para participar activamente en la toma de decisiones que le afectan. Por ello, celebro que el PNUD coadyuve a la reflexión con seminarios como en el que hoy participamos. A nombre del INE y del mío propio, agradezco a Anabel Sulmont, a Álvaro Beltrán, a Mónica Edén, la invitación para participar en este espacio. Es un honor para mí compartir este seminario con Naya, con el doctor David Evan y con Samson Aitodo para coadyuvar a la...
Olga,
Yes,
may I stop you for a second? Because I think
Of
we have
course.
some problems with interpretation. I'm so sorry.
don't worry, it's okay.
The English isn't coming through very clearly. Osama, who's doing the English interpretation?
We have Usama, but I think I can hear the sounds of the two interpreters at the same time, and that's the reason. So maybe if we could ask the interpreters who are sitting in the same exact room to join from another room, and maybe if we could just quickly do a test with you, Usama. Usama, can you please go to the English channel and try to speak? You are muted, by the way. Okay, perfect. Thanks. Olga, please go ahead.
Okay.
Olga, I'm so sorry. Do you mind starting over? Because unfortunately the colleagues missed it, the English speaking colleagues only.
Okay. I was saying that estamos viviendo en un mundo globalizado. La información fluye a la velocidad de la luz. Hemos visto cómo hay fenómenos que, como el Brexit, el no a la paz en Colombia, arribo de populismos de izquierda y derecha en todas latitudes. Esto demuestra que hay una ciudadanía cada vez más alejada de los valores democráticos, con una gran desconfianza tanto en las instituciones públicas como entre las mismas personas y el debilitamiento de un tejido social. Esto refleja un desencanto con la democracia que no ha resuelto los problemas estructurales de pobreza, desigualdad y subraya la necesidad de impulsar un cambio cultural. En este contexto, es necesario que construyamos espacios de deliberación y participación política, y para eso las tecnologías de la información nos ayudan muchísimo. La red, con R mayúscula, es un espacio donde la sociedad puede expresar sus preocupaciones, puede organizarse para participar en la toma de decisiones que le afectan. Y pues por ello celebro que el PNUD coadyuve en la reflexión, como este seminario en el que estamos todos participando. A nombre del INE y del mío propio, agradezco al PNUD, a Anabel Sulmont, a Álvaro Beltrán, a Mónica Edén, la invitación para participar en este espacio. Me siento muy honrada de compartir este seminario con Aya, con el doctor David Eiban, con Samon Aitoro, para coadyuvar a la reflexión sobre cómo las instituciones electorales están respondiendo a los desafíos de la desinformación impulsada por la inteligencia artificial. El pasado 15 de septiembre se celebró el Día Internacional de la Democracia. Esta fecha nos invita a reflexionar sobre la necesidad de preservar y fortalecer valores que garantizan la participación ciudadana, la pluralidad y el respeto a los derechos humanos. También nos llama a atender nuevos desafíos que enfrenta la democracia, como la inteligencia artificial, esta herramienta que ha demostrado ser capaz de potenciar la circulación de información y también amplificar la infodemia. Ya nos ilustraba David cómo uno de los mayores riesgos para los sistemas democráticos es la manipulación de la información y cómo la inteligencia artificial ha potenciado la generación de contenidos falsos como los deepfakes, como la alucinación digital, estos casos en los cuales la inteligencia artificial genera información falsa y se confunde con cierta y amenaza la veracidad de la información pública. Potencia la proliferación de noticias falsas que afectan directamente los procesos electorales, la credibilidad de las instituciones y la confianza ciudadana en la democracia. Frente a estos retos, las instituciones democráticas debemos replantear nuestras estrategias para proteger el espacio público digital, tomando en cuenta la inteligencia artificial. Tenemos que pensar en soluciones creativas para combatir la desinformación y aplicar las mejores prácticas internacionales para fortalecer la integridad electoral y la confianza ciudadana. Hoy el mundo avanza hacia una inteligencia artificial responsable. En marzo del año pasado, la ONU creó un órgano asesor y aprobó con el respaldo de más de 120 países una resolución para promover sistemas seguros y fiables. En el mismo sentido, la Unión Europea aprobó también el año pasado la Ley de Inteligencia Artificial que entrará en vigor el próximo año para gestionar riesgos y reforzar transparencia y rendición de cuentas. En el Instituto Nacional Electoral hemos dado pasos decisivos para integrar la inteligencia artificial en nuestros procesos, bajo un enfoque de gobernanza, capacitación institucional y aplicación práctica en materia electoral. En cuestión de reglamentación, el 20 de agosto de este año, hace apenas un mes, la Junta General Ejecutiva aprobó los lineamientos y principios para el desarrollo estratégico y uso regulado de la inteligencia artificial. También aprobó el plan de trabajo institucional, gobernanza y uso responsable de la inteligencia artificial en el INE. Estos instrumentos colocan al instituto a la vanguardia internacional al contar con una regulación de avanzada con base en referentes como la Agenda Nacional de Inteligencia Artificial en México 2430, el marco europeo en la materia y la norma ISO/IS 42001 de 2023. El programa aprobado tiene como objetivo consolidar capacidades técnicas y normativas para un uso seguro y transparente de la inteligencia artificial en procesos electorales, garantizando soberanía tecnológica y pleno respeto a los derechos ciudadanos. Por su parte, los lineamientos y principios para el desarrollo estratégico y uso regulado de la inteligencia artificial establecen que en el INE esta herramienta tendrá carácter auxiliar, siempre será bajo supervisión humana y no podrá sustituir la toma de decisiones institucionales. También se fijan disposiciones sobre protección de datos, transparencia, igualdad y no discriminación y un mecanismo de verificación jurídica que asegure el respeto a los derechos humanos. En el segundo eje que el INE ha tomado para enfrentar este reto es la gestión del conocimiento institucional. Se ha impulsado su formación interna y la cooperación internacional en torno al uso democrático de la inteligencia artificial. Podría comentarles la participación en encuentros virtuales de la red de escuelas, institutos y centros de capacitación en democracia que se celebraron en octubre del año pasado, y el tema fue combate a la desinformación y la inteligencia artificial a favor de la democracia. En esta conferencia, organismos de la región compartieron experiencias de gobernanza digital, alfabetización mediática y verificación de contenidos. También, en colaboración con IDEA Internacional, se organizó un taller especializado en inteligencia artificial y gestión electoral, en donde se analizaron riesgos y oportunidades de la inteligencia artificial para la integridad electoral. También intercambiamos experiencias como la de Brasil en regulación y la de Microsoft sobre desinformación digital. También para fomentar la creación y difusión de conocimiento en la materia, el INE aumentó en su catálogo editorial algunos estudios entre los que se pueden destacar el glosario contra la desinformación, la confianza en otra obra es Confianza en las noticias en redes sociales, el caso de la ciudad de Leeds en la elección general del Reino Unido en 2017, y también puedo mencionar una coedición que se llama Infocracia, la digitalización y la crisis de la democracia. Algunas de estas obras pueden consultarse en el repositorio de las publicaciones del INE, que pueden consultar en el código QR que se observa en la pantalla, y también ahorita alguien de mi equipo va a poner en el chat la liga para que puedan acceder al repositorio de publicaciones del INE. Y en el INE no nos hemos limitado al diseño normativo y a la formación de los funcionarios. También se han implementado soluciones de inteligencia artificial en etapas concretas de los procesos electorales. Por ejemplo, desde 2018 se utiliza el reconocimiento facial para verificar la identidad de los electores. Así tenemos mayor eficiencia, precisión y transparencia en el proceso que en los siguientes años hemos venido perfeccionando. También se ha utilizado el análisis de sentimiento, mediante el cual se ha monitoreado en redes sociales y se ha podido conocer percepciones ciudadanas y niveles de confianza en las elecciones, con especial atención a la visión de los jóvenes. Otro ejemplo de ello es el chatbot Inés, que es un juego de letras. Está el acrónimo INE y un nombre femenino en español, que es Inés. Es un asistente virtual en WhatsApp para combatir la desinformación y responder dudas ciudadanas. Inés forma parte de la estrategia Certeza INE, mediante la cual se monitorean las redes sociales durante los procesos electorales para analizar mensajes en tendencia, identificar posibles casos de desinformación y desarticularlas en tiempo real. Así podemos generar información oportuna y confiable en contextos electorales. Estas experiencias reflejan cómo la inteligencia artificial se integra como un instrumento auxiliar y estratégico del instituto para reforzar la transparencia, el combate a la desinformación y elevar la confianza ciudadana en los procesos democráticos. Podría concluir diciendo que en el contexto de los procesos electorales, el mal uso de la inteligencia artificial se suma a los desafíos que debemos afrontar las autoridades electorales en el mundo, y en el caso particular de México es un reto aún mayor porque no tenemos un marco legal que regule el uso de Internet, redes sociales o sancione la difusión durante las campañas electorales. Así lo ha planteado los consejeros, específicamente la consejera Dania Rabel desde el año pasado. La inteligencia artificial ofrece tanto oportunidades como desafíos en los procesos electorales. Requerimos una regulación adecuada, un enfoque ético en su implementación y nos obliga a replantear la pedagogía de la comunicación y la participación política. La participación ciudadana es una condición sine qua non para la consolidación de la democracia. El Estado, las organizaciones de la sociedad civil y la ciudadanía en general debemos estar atentos a las malas prácticas en el uso de las TIC y eliminarlas a través de leyes, policía cibernética y fomento entre la ciudadanía de una cultura de verificación de la información. Por eso celebro la creación de espacios como este, que permite concientizar a las personas sobre un mejor uso de la gran ágora que es la Internet y la gran herramienta que es la inteligencia artificial, que facilita el aprendizaje y posibilita acercar a la población información relevante para los procesos electorales. Debemos usar la inteligencia artificial desde la luz y no vencernos al lado oscuro. Mi agradecimiento a la Subdirección de Información y Gestión del Conocimiento por su participación en la preparación de esta ponencia. Muchas gracias por su atención. Estoy a sus órdenes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Olga. INE is definitely on the advanced end when it comes to use of AI and educating its institutions. So fantastic for that. I'm sure there are questions from colleagues already. Please put your questions in the chat. We're going to go to the third speaker, and then we'll give a chance to our speakers to respond to you. But to save time, please already put your questions in. So we'll go to our third speaker. Mr. Samson Itodo, he's joining us as Executive Director of IAGA Africa and convener of the Not Too Young to Run movement, which successfully championed reforms and expanded participation of youth in Nigeria and beyond. He has decades of experience in governance and participation, political reform. He's recognized globally. He's won a lot of awards. Gates Foundation as a goalkeeper. The African Youth Awards is one of the 100 most influential young Africans. He brings a vital perspective on how AI is shaping participation, civic power, and we're very happy to have you here, Samson. You have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much, Nadia. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are. So I come to the AI conversation from two perspectives. First, I am a member of the Africa Union Advisory Group on AI and Peace and Security, but I also work and do research on AI and how AI is impacting election administration. But I've been asked to talk about another topic that is very dear to my heart, which is how youth and AI intersect in democracy. As I was preparing for this session, I asked myself, what are the top 3 things I would like to communicate to everyone who is part of this conversation? And let me begin with the first one. And I don't know if I can share my screen, if it's possible. If it's possible, permit me to share this. So the first thing I'd like to put on the table is the use cases of AI in elections. And often people say AI, or when conversations on AI are being held, it is limited to the whole concept of disinformation or information integrity. But when you look at election integrity, there are use cases of AI in election administration. One is voter authentication, two is voter list management, campaign finance, voter information and outreach, cyber detection, and electoral fraud detection. Why am I pulling this slide up? I am pulling this slide because when you think about youth and political participation, one of the challenges that young people grapple with is the lack of access to quality, accurate information about elections and about the electoral process. And because of the lack of access to this quality information, young people feel disconnected, from the political process. And one of the opportunities that AI does present to reverse, young people's perception about political participation is the fact that AI is used for voter information and outreach. And the two previous speakers have talked about the role of chatbots. Chatbot does provide a very unique opportunity and a tool for providing information to young people, understanding how elections work, understanding the political process, but more importantly, also having access to key election activities, whether it is voter authentication or voter registration or campaign-related activities. So when you think about one of the challenges that young people face, which is our lack of access to information, AI does present an opportunity for that. The second basic challenge that young people grapple with is that politics is boring. Politics is for old, pot-bellied men. And that's what young people actually think, because it's dominated by old men, and there are less women in politics. And one of the things that AI does, it makes politics very interesting, captivating, and meaningful for young people. When you go to TikTok, when you look at X, you look at the work Grok is doing, even though it has its own challenges, but AI tries to make politics very interesting for young people. And you see how it's being used to foster political conversations. If you're on X, you're on TikTok, you're on Meta, whatever platform, Gen AI is providing an opportunity for young people to organize effectively and also engage the political process. But more importantly, it is providing young people with the opportunity to hold political leaders to account. And you can see how they are challenging traditional political structures, just using AI and just the exponential way that information is being disseminated. So that is the second. I think the last point I'd like to make, because we're looking at time, is the lack of trust that young people have about the electoral process. So a lot of young people that I've spoken with, not just in Africa, but across the world, they feel their votes will not count, and it doesn't count. But AI provides a very strategic opportunity for building and inspiring trust and confidence in the electoral process. So for instance, if you use one of the AI techniques called computer vision, I have seen young people use computer vision as a technique to take images, scanned images of result sheets during elections, and put them online, aggregating those information to provide accountability so that electoral processes are transparent. That is one use case where we've seen a practical case where young people have employed AI to make political engagement very, very exciting. But like the two previous speakers have said, there are several risks that are associated with AI. Things like algorithmic bias, the intrusive nature of AI makes privacy rights undermined in some cases. And to a large extent, you also have issues between lack of transparency. And my concluding thought is to say that AI is a very powerful tool for the young people of this generation. Their capacity and their disposition to using AI effectively in politics can really accelerate the number of young people who get involved in politics. And I think AI provides a huge opportunity, but there are some challenges. But if you do the cost-benefit analysis, to a large extent, I think the benefits of leveraging AI to facilitate youth participation in the political process outweighs the risk that it poses. I welcome thoughts and questions, but thanks.
Sorry. Thank you so much, Samson. You take a very positive approach to AI and the benefits of it for youth participation. So now I think we'll take some reflections and thoughts from the audience. There are already a couple of questions, a couple from me to David and Olga, and also there's one from Osama. David, I don't know if you've seen the questions. Should I repeat them to you?
You know, there's a lot of action in this chat, so if you could repeat them, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. So you have a question that says, David, you highlighted a pattern of tech companies taking the bare minimum, second worst approach, and even rolling back safeguards. From your perspective, what kind of regulatory model do you think is realistic and enforceable globally? The easy question.
Easy question. Yeah. I mean, this is a real constant one because, you know, inside of these tech companies, every day, people have to make decisions, especially in the bigger companies. These are ongoing conversations. People have to pass judgment on the legitimacy of nation states. And that's a really uncomfortable place to be for someone who believes in democracy and is sitting inside of a very clearly not democratically run company, right? I mean, these companies are not democracies. These companies are clearly for-profit run with a single CEO who runs the show. But someone in that company needs to decide, you know, do we collaborate today with the government of, you know, X country? And then do we collaborate tomorrow with the government of that country when they ask us to take down content, when they ask us to deliver information about people who might have broken laws that maybe are not laws that the company thinks of as legitimate, right? And so this question about regulating tech companies globally is really difficult. And, you know, I assume the people on this call who are taking the time and you know, dedicating their careers to this are obviously people who are committed to democracy. But I think all of us, including myself sitting in the United States, need to think about a threat model that includes people getting elected to run our countries who are not in favor of democracy, right? Like all of our democracies are constantly under threat. And so that's why, you know, I mentioned the EU's Digital Services Act as a possible model. Now, a lot of people ask me when I give talks, like, are you in support of the EU Digital Services Act being copied and pasted to, you know, authoritarian countries? Is that a good idea? Now, I think there are lots of places in the world where I would not want to see that necessarily. But one of the great things about the Digital Services Act is that it mentions, you know, throughout the act, the importance of preserving freedom of expression. And the approach that it takes is that it asks the companies to be transparent about what work they are doing to prevent risks to democracy and risks to electoral systems. And it creates this you know, regulatory dialogue with the companies. And I think that regulatory dialogue is really important because the companies themselves don't even understand their own technologies. Right. And we can't expect that regulators around the world are going to be able to keep up with all the new threats of these technologies. And so asking the companies to be more transparent, report on their risks, share what they are doing, forces them into at least doing something to stop these risks. And so I do think that is a good model. You know, I've tried here in California where I live to do work on this, but you know, in California, we have these really strong industry lobbying groups that push back on anything that you do to regulate the tech companies, including attempts that we've made to ban, you know, fraudulent deep fakes that impersonate election candidates or election officials. So, you know, we've been trying in California, and there's currently a legal case, like one of the bills that I worked on last year in California, X sued to block it. And there's currently a temporary injunction in place. And the state's attorney general may fight that. We're kind of waiting to find out what happens there. But I do think that any AI generated content should be labeled at a bare minimum. I did work on a bill that just passed the California legislature this year. And now actually, the EU, China, and California all have laws coming into force or that just came into force. And the Chinese one is in force now, is my understanding. But EU and California both come into force. This was deliberate. California timed it to coincide with EU in August of 2026. And those laws require transparency about what content is AI generated. So any AI company operating in those jurisdictions needs to embed what's called provenance data in AI generated content. And provenance data includes a few technologies that you might have heard of, including watermarks, digital signatures, cryptographic metadata. And I think that's a great step in any country in the world to just require transparency about what content is AI generated or not. That's something that is, in a way, content neutral. It doesn't impact that doesn't relate to like what the content is actually saying. It just says you need to give people the ability to tell where a piece of content came from. Did it come from a camera or an audio recorder, or did it come from an AI image generator? So I think that's another good place to go. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, David. There are a couple of questions that relate to more specifics of what an electoral body can do.
It looked like Olga was
Electoral-
raising her hand.
Thank you, David.
Oh,
Please,
sorry to
Olga.
interrupt you.
No, I didn't see the hand. Olga, please.
See, I saw a couple of questions about how in INE we face the challenge of the IA or los mayores retos que enfrentamos. Yo los dividiría en tres. El mayor de ellos es la confianza de la ciudadanía para usar no solamente la inteligencia artificial, sino en general las tecnologías de la información. Actualmente tenemos a la mano la tecnología suficiente como para tener el voto electrónico, por ejemplo, reconocimiento facial, para muchas otras cosas que podríamos utilizar. Sin embargo, considero que no es el problema tecnológico, sino sobre la confianza de los actores políticos y de la ciudadanía en general. Otro reto, al igual que en Irak, tenemos que desarrollar nuevas habilidades y conocimientos para esta implementación. Y el tercer reto, y muy importante, es el de la ciudadanía y es la alfabetización mediática. Para enfrentar este último reto, de la mano de Movilizatorio, es un laboratorio que moviliza el poder ciudadano en busca de un mundo social y ambientalmente equitativo. Es una organización latinoamericana liderada por mujeres y juventud que moviliza personas, y con ellos hemos implementado ya por la tercera edición de cursos de alfabetización mediática en los cuales enseñamos orientadas hacia los jóvenes, hacia las juventudes, para que puedan identificar noticias falsas, ilustrarlos sobre cómo eh, checar cómo y en dónde verificar las noticias, esta cultura de la verificación. Y por ejemplo, quisiera darles un ejemplo muy positivo. En Suiza, cada 3 meses tienen votaciones y consultas populares, y previo a la cita en las urnas, se arman acalorados debates en la red, en tono muy áspero, ofensas, expresiones de odio, incluso amenazas de muerte. Sabemos que es bueno el debate, pero tiene que ser bajo los principios de tolerancia y discusiones objetivas. Entonces, los sectores minoritarios en Suiza empezaron a tener miedo de expresar su opinión, y Alliance F, en conjunto con el gobierno, desarrolló un algoritmo contra los mensajes que incitan al odio, y lo llamaron el bot dog, ¿no? Sabueso, porque funciona como un sabueso que busca discursos ofensivos. Al identificar estos discursos es posible desactivarlos y pues este es un ejemplo de cómo la inteligencia artificial puede incidir de manera positiva, ayudando a fortalecer la democracia. También hubo una pregunta sobre quién, quién llevaba en el INE la inteligencia artificial, y es un grupo de gobierno de tecnología de la información y la comunicación. Este grupo de gobierno está conformado por diversas áreas encabezadas evidentemente por la dirección de sistemas, el área de sistemas, pero también es multidisciplinario. Hay personas en este grupo de gobierno de tecnología de la información, de jurídico y de transparencia y protección de datos. ¿Es cuánto?
Thank you, Olga, so much. So David, you're going to leave us early, so I'm going to ask you to do some.
I still have 20 more minutes, so I was just
Okay,
anticipating maybe we
perfect.
wouldn't
So
get to
maybe
anything.
I go to, perfect, thanks. Maybe Samson, you have several questions in the chat. Do you want to reflect on them? Do you hear me, Samson? You had a problem with your connection earlier.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, so what's the question?
I'll read it out to you. So a couple of questions. One particular of what EMBs can do practically to protect participation. So we don't have real answers, I know, but I think we're all struggling to address this together. So your thoughts, please.
All right, so I would say three things that EMBs can do, and Olga has touched on some of them. The first one is EMBs need to recognize that AI enthusiasm does not equal preparedness. You have to be prepared, to employ AI before you venture into it. So first, we always recommend to EMBs to conduct readiness assessments before you employ whether it's small or large-scale artificial intelligence, be it chatbot. And it's basically to check your technical preparedness, whether you have the human assets in your electoral commission to deploy artificial intelligence. It's always important, but also have clear understanding of what are the risks, like some of the risks that we talk about. So that's one. I think the second point that EMBs, in terms of mitigating some of this risk, is this whole question of how you're procuring AI from vendors. There are questions that you need to ask about the codes, the algorithms, who has control of the data. Because as you know, AI is a computer system, that mimics human reasoning based on certain patterns that are deducible from data. And so it's about machine learning. So when you're providing data or information to a vendor to design or train those machines, the question you should be asking is who has power and control over the data? That's why data privacy rights need to be protected by electoral commissions. And I think the last, point around this in terms of what EMBs, can do as they try to leverage AI and foster participation is this whole question about ethics and responsible deployment of AI by EMBs. And EMBs, and I see that there are technical advisors of EMBs on this call, you've got to call on EMBs to set up AI ethics committees that ensures that they audit, some of the AI tools being used by electoral commissions. I think that that's something that EMBs can do because you have to be proactive in putting mechanisms in place, because whilst EMBs are driven by the public good, a lot of the big tech companies are driven by profits. They do not have, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, the consciousness that AI assaults certain human rights, and that election is a human rights activity because there are certain rights that are embedded in the course of elections. And so it's important to ensure that those rights, are upheld in both the design, the development, and the deployment of AI systems. And you can leverage several tools. If you're having contracts with those companies, wherever they are, if they violate rights, there should be conditions for terminating those contracts. And you should ensure your local laws in those countries hold those companies, to account. Because one of the challenges EMBs have always had is how do they hold big tech companies to account, even when they propagate disinformation or allow their platforms to be used for propagating hate speech.
Thanks, Samson. There's another question to you, and I will quickly ask it. And I think you touched on it indirectly, but they're asking about youth who perpetuate false and disinformation online. So the negative aspects, and how do you regulate it, and what is your experience with that?
I think at the end of the day, you can set up all these mechanisms to checkmate this, whether they are platforms, but it boils down to the individual. And this is why political education and media literacy is important. We can't underestimate the fact that we need to constantly conscientize and orient people on how they can use these tools and also debunk, disinformation. I think the second point really is to expose people to the dangers of disinformation, what it can cause, in a society. And that if, as a result of this information, there's political stability or there's lack of trust or unacceptability of electoral outcomes, it affects us all as a people. And then thirdly, is that currently there are several cybersecurity legislations that are in place that criminalize the propagation of false information on social media platforms. Whilst I strongly agree that some of these laws need to be enforced, but we must also be careful that they are not used by authoritarians to assault or cut down on the rights of citizens, to engage. And something particularly worrisome is that for some of the big tech platforms, some of the guardrails that were in place prior to Trump's election, those guardrails have now been removed. If you work closely with Meta, Meta had the whole trusted partners framework. Where are they today? So there's that debate, between what is free speech and what is alternative facts and all that. Yes, we are in that world, and we have to recognize that the world has changed right before us, and we need to update our toolbox, but we also need to be invested in debunking disinformation and not wait until it has, impacted and polluted the entire information system, and then we're playing catch up. I hope that makes sense and in response to the question.
Yes, Samson, I think you highlighted critical points there, but I want to ask David to come in because I see he has something important to say. He has a solution for us.
I don't, these are problems that don't have single solutions, but so when I worked at Facebook, I onboarded a lot of partners onto that Trusted Partners program, and it is unfortunate to hear what you said about that being absent. Now, I think one of the things that, again, that I like about the EU Digital Services Act is that it actually does have this provision for what they call trusted flaggers. And I think that's very similar to the idea of the Trusted Partners program. And I think that there are some really interesting ways that people can think about, even if you're not in the EU, how the EU Digital Services Act can be a valuable tool for you in preserving election integrity, because it is rare that any of these election interference efforts are exclusively happening in the borders of one country or exclusively seen within the borders of one country. So by partnering, and this is very recent now, in addition to the Trusted Flaggers program in the EU, there is also this program for researcher data access. So if you are either collaborating with a trusted flagger organization that's based in the EU or that has EU citizens in it, that might give you a way to flag things that are being seen in Europe or that are maybe originating in Europe. Like there are a lot of I can't name countries, but there are disinformation campaigns where people are very active in the EU that are targeting, for example, African countries, right? Like that is absolutely clearly happening. So you could think about that as as one dynamic here, where you could either be reaching out to trusted flaggers to flag things that are based in the EU, or you could be collaborating with EU vetted researchers who have access to platform data to conduct research about these disinformation campaigns. Now, that's not something that allows you to address the issues that come up in the final days and hours before an election that are so important. But if you're trying to do research retrospectively on on what happened in an election, working through that Article 40.12 of the Digital Services Act to conduct research in partnership with European academics could be, I think, very fruitful.
Olga? Olga, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you. En el tema de desinformación, en el INE hemos trabajado para poder contrarrestarla. Hemos producido y difundido cápsulas audiovisuales para concientizar a la ciudadanía sobre la desinformación y prevenir su diseminación. De la mano de la Universidad Iberoamericana, del doctor Guerrero, que nos introdujo a una metodología que exportó de Cornell y de su viaje por Europa, es la metodología de la inoculación. Esto consiste en, primer paso, advertir a la población sobre un inminente intento de desinformación. 2, presentar una microdosis como ejemplo para reconocer la técnica. Y 3, refutarla preventivamente explicando el mecanismo de manipulación utilizado. Como ejemplo, por ejemplo, puedo mencionar las cápsulas que hicimos para advertir que las personas querían desacreditar el uso del crayón que se utiliza que utilizamos en las casillas para marcar la votación. Entonces, en una cápsula con actores jóvenes, pusimos, ¿sabes que ya viste que la tinta del INE se borra o pueden borrar tu voto? ¿Cómo? No creas eso, y refutamos explicando que se ha manipulado, ¿no? En una voz en off. Quizá pueda encontrar esa cápsula en unos momentos pero pues va a estar en español. Y esta metodología, recientemente, una investigación de la Universidad de Cornell con Google afirmaron que la combinación de 2 o más campañas de pre-bunking aumenta el rechazo de información sospechosa en redes sociales. Estos resultados se presentaron en la revista Nature y son claras. Por sí sola, la inoculación para detectar lenguaje emocional manipulativo no funcionará si no se refuerza con advertencias sobre la probabilidad de leer información falsa. Esta técnica de inoculación la hemos usado con buenos resultados en el INE y ahora estamos trabajando igual de la mano con la Iberoamericana para estudiar cómo se consume y disemina la información falsa en México. Queremos perfilar a las personas que comparten información falsa, bueno, y también verdadera, mediante una encuesta, averiguar los factores individuales y de contexto que inciden en esa conducta probar la efectividad de distintas intervenciones cívicas y formativas sobre el reconocimiento e intención de compartir noticias falsas y finalmente, con base en lo que saquemos de este estudio, formular recomendaciones de política pública para fortalecer la alfabetización mediática e informacional. Sí tenemos, no sé si quieran ver este video, lo podremos compartir, Nasha. Adelante.
Will the sound play, Osama? No, we don't have sound.
Okay,
Thank you, Olga.
maybe I can share the link.
Yeah, maybe you can share
to
the
the
link.
video.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think that Ine's experience is fantastic in stressing the message I think we've been hearing from all the speakers is the need to educate ourselves. We seem to be behind already. Every day we're falling behind in terms of understanding, knowing. And so this is why this community is important. And I wanted David to mention, what we feel when we work with institutions in this global south, if you will. They really don't have a voice, both in the design of these platforms and the managing of them, as well as in regulations. And so there's really difficulty in finding where are the spaces to influence. And so maybe if you can touch a little bit on that. And also maybe there's a comment from Sky on the work with parliaments. I mean, this is to UNDP, but maybe you can touch on the links that are now being made in the US between electoral administration and legislators and companies, this landscape of everyone must work together to be a comprehensive response to the challenges that this new technology gives us.
Yeah, those are great prompts here. So on the question of the people in the global majority not having influence on the design of these platforms, I absolutely agree that that's a problem. When I was inside of Meta, I was part of a number of efforts to create co-design programs where we actually invited people in from civil society organizations around the world to give input on the design of the platforms, especially how the platforms worked in election processes. Unfortunately, I think some of the things that we did may still exist in the company, but we didn't get to accomplish everything we wanted to. But I do think that's a reason why laws about this should not be framed in ways that are overly overly technically prescriptive. So like there you can make laws about it's illegal to distribute fraudulent AI that imitates a candidate. I think those laws are great, and I think we should pass those. But I think you can also make laws around, again, I'll hold up the Digital Services Act, but I think there are also efforts in the US right now to pass laws that relate to the design of the algorithms themselves. And, whether or not one piece of content is taken down from a platform is a really important question. Another perhaps even more important question, or I'd say equally important question, is how many views does each piece of dangerous content or election interfering content or false content get, and how does the design of these algorithms make an impact? I think we've all heard anecdotally so many times about how more extreme views tend to get more engagement on these platforms. And I think if that were not the case, there'd probably be a different person running the United States right now. And it's that dynamic of building algorithms that lead to polarization is, I think, a really problematic one. And it's something that we need to study. It's something that we need researchers to have the ability to study, which in most parts of the world, researchers don't even have the ability to study that. But so pushing the companies again to conduct these risk assessments that are broad. You know, what is the risk to elections that your platform overall poses? And this needs to include not just the content policies of the platform, but also the design choices made by the platform. So I think that is really important. Then, yeah, should UNDP be working with parliaments to pass effective laws for DSI style oversight of platforms? I mean, yeah, I think UNDP is an absolutely great institution to do that kind of thing. And I think that the two new bodies that have been created to work on AI, you know, that are being promoted this week, the Global Dialogue on AI and the International Scientific Panel on AI. Those are also important vehicles that I hope the UNDP is very actively participating in to make sure that the impacts of AI on democracy stay at the top of the agenda for those things, because it's really easy for AI and democracy and AI and elections to fall to the bottom of a long list of the harms that AI can cause. Sometimes things like AI and its harms to children end up at the top of the list. Very important. I have children. I care about that. But then AI and existential risk, AI and biological weapons, AI when you get AI discrimination, right? Like all these things are huge problems. But if people like us on this call today are not trying to keep AI and elections on that list and near the top, it falls off. So absolutely, I think that's a role. But thank you so much for having me. I have to drop off, but this has been wonderful to be on the panel.
Thank you so much, David. It was a pleasure having you, and thanks for sharing your LinkedIn. Colleagues, please do stay in touch with David. He's offered to respond when you send him questions, and we hope you'll be back with us, David.
Thank you. I hope you.
Olga, you're muted. Did you have your hand up? No. Okay. So, colleagues, yes, no?
Estaba
Samson, did you want to
despidiendo a
come in?
David solamente.
Oh, we're not doing goodbyes yet. I'm going to give you and Sam. We said goodbye to David, but I do want to give a chance to you and Samson to do some last reflections, and then we can close the webinar. I'm going to check the chat group if there's any more questions. No. So Olga, over to you. You're muted. Still muted, Olga? There.
Okay. Yes. ¿Ya me escuchó?
Yes.
El desarrollo de las tecnologías, el Big Data, la automatización y la inteligencia artificial han creado grandes expectativas, pero también incertidumbres sobre el uso que se les pueda dar. En todo el mundo, y como lo hemos visto en este seminario, hay preocupaciones sobre cómo se verán afectados los derechos y las libertades, la privacidad y la protección de datos. Los sesgos algorítmicos, el monopolio que detentan algunas empresas y la falta de legislación en la materia, pero también la preocupación sobre los efectos en los procesos políticos electorales y en la democracia misma. Estamos en un acelerado avance de la cuarta revolución industrial y hemos enfrentado diversas crisis, entre otras las brechas tecnológicas, de la cual también es importante recordar, hacen ver con suspicacia adoptar estas nuevas herramientas. Pero también hay bríos para aprovecharla en varios ámbitos. La inteligencia artificial, en efecto, puede ser una herramienta que debilite la democracia, pero también que la puede fortalecer. Si se consigue atender 3 cuestiones: reducir la brecha digital, promover una educación digital y divulgar la cultura política democrática para formar ciudadanía. Estamos en momentos cuando la integridad electoral, integridad de la información, se ve amenazada, porque todos estos videos de deepfake, las fake news, desinformación, campañas de odio, están alcanzando su máxima expresión en dentro de la política, y los efectos impactan los resultados electorales. ¿Realmente nosotros decidimos o deciden por nosotros? Igual que decidimos si comprar una marca X o una marca Y, estamos votando libre, tenemos esa libertad. Las elecciones son íntegras, son elecciones en libertad. A estos desafíos, ante estos desafíos, surge la necesidad de que las instituciones, la sociedad en general, nos planteemos cómo podemos ayudar a contrarrestar los retos. ¿Quiénes tendrían que participar? ¿Cómo innovar en el trabajo cotidiano? Tenemos la obligación de desarrollar una deontología, una cordialidad con la ciudadanía para que se interesen en el tema y puedan lograr identificar los intentos de manipulación que quieren hacernos para desvirtuar la participación ciudadana, los procesos electorales y en general la democracia.
Thank you so much, Olga. Over to you, Samson.
Well, thank you very much. I think my first concluding thought is we need to be conscious of the fact that the AI space is another terrain of geopolitics and contest for power, and that there is an asymmetry of power because the 3 major pillars upon which AI is built, algorithms, data, and digital infrastructure, when you look at cross-board, the US actually controls most of the sort of top big companies in the world. And so we have to ensure that we are conscious of this so that countries in the global south, have the opportunity to exercise sovereignty in this entire discussion about AI. And what we do need is actually a pluriversal AI, and is one that is responsive and conscious of this power dynamics. The second concluding thought is that a human-centered and a risk-based approach towards AI regulation is an antidote to the risk that AI poses. That humans have to always be at the center, and that we have to be conscious of the risk. So a human-centered and a risk-based approach towards AI regulation or AI legislation or AI national strategy is most important. And the last point I will make, and given that, again, we have folks who work with, EMBs on this call, is that AI enthusiasm does not equal preparedness to employ AI. And we have to constantly call on government institutions and election management body to be prepared before they employ any kind of AI, either to promote efficiency or deepen trust in the electoral process. But thanks, Nadia. It's been an incredible session just listening and learning from everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samson. I think these are really important points. Unfortunately, we'll have to have a lot more conversations like this. But for me, the three takeaways from all of you in the conversation in the chat really is one, that we can't afford to be passive in the face of all these changes and very rapid changes. And we can't wait for perfect solutions really to emerge. It is our responsibility, both as individuals and as institutions, to educate ourselves and those around us. So I really appreciate the speakers here and all of you for being part of that learning. And then we also, I think the panelists across the board stressed on platforms being profit-making companies. That means there must be consistent pressure from all of us to hold them accountable. They won't do it on their own. So I think that is a message that's important for us to hear. How we do that, we will continue the conversation. And then for me, third, the takeaway really is that there are avenues for learning and advocacy, being part of this conversation and also learning from the experiences of electoral administrations like INE, who've really adopted AI tools and also adopted learning mechanisms to get the institution ready for this new digital era. So these are the types of connections that will support our journey in this transformation. And so I want to thank all of you for being here. Please stay in touch with each other and join us in the next webinar. Thank you, Olga, Samson, and of course, David, who left us. And very good to see colleagues from around the world here.
Gracias, que tengan buen